This is a 1991 American supernatural horror film, and it reveals why people are always trying to contact ancient dark beings, because once they succeed, eternal life is only the smallest reward. The story takes place in a psychiatric hospital in Providence, where Dr. Waite is preparing to leave work when a hospital orderly suddenly bursts into his office claiming that the patient, Charles Dexter Ward, has escaped. This leaves Dr. Waite utterly confused. How could a man restrained in a straitjacket possibly escape? When he arrives at the ward, he finds that everyone is too terrified to enter, because the scene inside the room is like hell. An orderly has had his head torn clean off, and there's a puddle of blue-gray ash on the floor. The protective net on the window has been damaged, showing that the patient escaped through there, and security has already found his suitcase downstairs. Dr. Waite immediately contacts the police to launch a citywide search. Meanwhile, inside a roadside detective agency, a young investigator named John, covered in blood, is recording the terrifying events he has just experienced on a tape recorder. 3 weeks earlier, John had received a very unusual commission. Mrs. Clare wanted him to investigate her husband Charles, who had suddenly moved out of their home and had not spoken to her for a long time. John originally thought this was nothing more than a simple affair case, but Clare's next words instantly made him take it very seriously. Last night, the police suddenly came to Claire, claiming they had found some illegal items inside Charles's house.
What sort of contraband?
Apparently, remains from cemeteries.
Do you mean human remains? Let's see. And how did your husband explain that?
I don't know. I haven't spoken to him for more than 2 weeks. Our 1-year anniversary is coming up, and...
Why did Charles move out?
Claire told John that Charles was a chemical engineer at a company, and for work reasons he had built a laboratory inside their garage. At first, this was perfectly normal, but suddenly one day Charles began working there through the night. The place reeked of a foul odor, and there were even faint screams coming from within. Claire quarreled bitterly with him about this, trying to force her husband to stop such strange behavior. But to her shock, the next morning she found that Charles had packed all his equipment into the car, preparing to leave. She tried to stop him, but ended up running into a stranger. At that moment, Charles stepped out of the car and introduced him as his friend Dr. Ash, saying that they had found a better place to carry out their experiments. Although Charles did not reveal what exactly he was doing, he swore to Claire that when the time was right, he would tell her the truth. Charles then returned to the farmhouse to continue his work, but since he always made noise at night, the male neighbor became angry and decided to call the police. When the police arrived, Charles happened to be receiving a shipment, and inside the crates were bodies taken from a cemetery. He managed to use some excuse to avoid being arrested at that time, but obviously things were far from over. After hearing the whole story, John did not immediately agree to take the case. Instead, he decided to investigate and verify the facts first, and then discuss it further with Claire. Finally, John asked Lonnie to check with the police about Charles's case, while he himself went directly to the farmhouse. On the way, John stopped at a gas station, but strangely, there was not a single person there. With no other choice, he went to check the warehouse in the back, and the moment he stepped inside, he set his foot down in a pool of blood. At that moment, an old man came out of the house and told him it was just some dog blood, because for some unknown reason, a large number of wild dogs had recently appeared in the area, often running under trucks and splattering blood everywhere.
Could I have some gas out here if you don't mind?
No problem. Come on.
Listen, I'm looking for the Ward place out on River Road. Couldn't find it on my map. Could you point me in the right direction?
When John mentioned Charles, the old man's face immediately darkened, saying that Charles was infamous in the area. Not in terms of character, but in the literal sense of a stench spreading far and wide. At first, John did not understand what this meant, but when he finally arrived at the farmhouse, it all became clear. From a great distance, he could already smell the stench of corpses, and it was obvious that the wild dogs had been drawn by that smell. John parked his car in front of the farmhouse, then pulled out a fake identification card as a fire inspector, preparing to check the house. But strangely, no one answered after he knocked for a long time, and the windows were sealed tightly, leaving him no choice but to search for another way in. Perhaps because he was too nervous, John did not notice that the dog was chewing on a human leg bone. Just as he prepared to knock again, the door suddenly opened by itself, and Raymond's menacing appearance sent a chill down his spine. But John was a seasoned private detective, so he forced himself to stay calm, pulled out his fake fire inspector ID, and claimed that someone had reported dangerous chemicals stored illegally, which required an inspection. While Raymond was caught off guard, Charles finally appeared after hearing the commotion. He was cunning, immediately turning the tables and demanding to see John's search warrant first. John had to deflect the question awkwardly, and Charles, seeing through him, simply prepared to shut the door and send him away.
Sir, do you mind telling me what was in those long boxes of yours?
I'm afraid that's none of your business. Good day.
John's investigation turned up nothing, but Lonnie had already uncovered a shocking lead, and just hearing the first sentence was enough to make him instantly serious. It turned out that what the police had seized from Charles's home was not a single body, but 8 full crates of ancient corpses. Even more striking was what came next. Interpol had discovered that these corpses were connected to 38 recent grave robberies across Europe. And all the stolen bodies shared one thing in common. They had all once been wizards or sorcerers. Charles's background appeared perfectly clean, and he claimed the delivery had been a mistake, so without evidence the police could do nothing. But everyone knew there had to be a deeper secret. That evening, John met Claire again, asking her for more clues about Charles. Claire thought carefully and realized that her husband's strange behavior had only started 6 months earlier. At that time, a lawyer had suddenly contacted Charles saying that he had an ancestor named Kerwin who had left an inheritance, and Charles had inherited the farmhouse. When they went to see it, the place held nothing of value due to its age. But just as they were about to leave, Charles unexpectedly discovered a portrait of Kerwin hidden behind the wallpaper, and later even took it home to restore. The painting exuded an eerie aura, and Charles actually looked almost identical to Kerwin. Later, Charles also brought back some manuscripts from the farmhouse, claiming they contained hidden ancient sciences, and from then on he began working all night in his laboratory. John became curious about the portrait, so he went back to Claire's home with her. The moment he saw it, he instantly felt uncomfortable, as though those painted eyes were staring directly at him. Then John entered Charles's laboratory, but there was nothing left except some used blood packs, which from their labels appeared to be only animal blood, and nothing more could be found. On the way back, John suddenly received a strange phone call. A woman said that the old man living near the farmhouse had something important to tell him. John immediately dialed the number she had left, but there was no reply on the other end, so he decided to drive straight over. However, when John arrived at the old man's house, he found that the police had already surrounded the place. After asking why he had come, the sheriff took him directly inside. What he saw next was almost too much for the experienced John to bear. The walls of the bedroom looked as if they had been painted with blood, and the old man lying on the floor no longer had any flesh, with only half a skeleton remaining. The sheriff suggested that the old man had been attacked by an animal, but John, who knew more about the case, realized this had to be connected to Charles. That night, John did not dare go home, instead staying at his office all night. To his surprise, the next morning Claire came to him again, bringing a cassette tape. This was a recording of a phone call secretly made by Charles. John quickly played the tape.
Charles, are you there? God, honey, if you still love me, please be there. I need help, Claire. I think I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I'm scared. I'm scared for you. So you've got to listen to me. Whatever happens, keep away from Dr. Ash. Don't let him in the house. Don't even talk to him.
John and Claire went to the farmhouse to check on Charles, and unlike last time, Charles actually let them in, although he looked far more haggard than before. According to Charles, the poor environment had caused him to contract tuberculosis, but thanks to Dr. Ash's careful care, his condition had begun to improve. John suggested thanking Dr. Ash in person, but Charles said that he had left on some matter. Claire did not want to see her husband destroy his health for experiments. She wanted to take Charles to the hospital, especially since their wedding anniversary was only days away. But no matter how much she tried to persuade him, Charles had only one answer, that before completing the final experiment, he would never leave the farmhouse. Claire ran to the car in tears, and once she had calmed down, she firmly told John that this man was absolutely not her husband. At this point, John voiced a theory. Some people use spiritual rituals to let the souls of the dead attach to their own bodies, allowing them to speak with them. So, Was it possible that Charles had called forth the soul of Kerwin, and once it attached to him, it took control? Another possibility was that Charles had been forced by Dr. Ashe. But whatever the truth, John knew he had to find evidence. In the days that followed, he and Lonnie searched everywhere for clues, hoping to discover the real reason. After several days of investigation, they found Charles's behavior was full of strange details. In recent days, he had ordered huge amounts of beef from the slaughterhouse, far more than a restaurant would use in a month. He also bought fresh blood that others had discarded. Even stranger, the bank noticed something was wrong. The handwriting on the checks he used for payment was forged, but when they came to verify, Charles insisted it was his own signature. After carefully reviewing all the evidence, John solemnly told Claire that this case was beyond what they could handle, and the police had to intervene. That night, the sheriff led a group of men into the farmhouse. They quickly subdued Raymond, but the others were nowhere to be found. Just as they were about to leave, Charles suddenly grabbed Claire, and this act made it even clearer that he was not her husband. With everyone working together, Charles was finally restrained. The doctors put him in a straitjacket and sent him directly to the asylum. To keep him under control, the doctors had no choice but to inject heavy sedatives. But once Charles calmed down, he made a bizarre request. He wanted to eat large amounts of raw meat.
I must have raw meat. Not disgusting, seared, burned flesh. It is the blood. I must have the blood. Your kitchen drains the blood from the meat.
Are you in control of your body?
For the present, yes. But I warn you, as the hunger grows, my control will surely weaken.
And if it weakens, what is it you think might happen?
It will be a damnable mess.
After examining him, the doctors found his body in terrible condition. It was a miracle that he was still alive, and his strange cravings could not be explained. Later, John returned to Charles's laboratory to search again, and to his surprise, he discovered a hidden diary belonging to Charles's great-grandfather Ezra, and the contents were shocking. Ezra had lived in the same era as Kerwin, and according to his notes, Kerwin had long practiced dark arts in secret, his actions exactly like Charles's, first buying large quantities of livestock from the slaughterhouse, then secretly transporting bodies in the middle of the night. To put an end to this threat, Ezra joined the police to search for Kerwin's underground chamber, but before they could act, a sudden heavy rain ruined their plan. The rising river burst a section of the bank, and hideous lumps of flesh were washed out. They looked grotesque, as if they were half-formed human creatures. These were taken as proof of Kerwin's dark rituals, and the sheriff ordered them to be destroyed by fire, then joined the villagers in attacking Kerwin's farmhouse. The matter seemed to end there. But at the end of the diary, Ezra mentioned that Kerwin's fate was unknown, yet his lover was pregnant with his child. If that was true, then Kerwin was in fact Charles's great-grandfather. At that moment, a breaking news report suddenly appeared on television. Another resident near the farmhouse had been attacked, and the wounds were similar to an animal mauling. This made John wonder if Charles had secretly created some kind of creature. Claire suggested that they call the police at once and reveal everything they had discovered. But after thinking it over, John believed it should not be made public. The truth would only cause panic, and Claire's future would be ruined by endless reporters. Fortunately, he knew a friend in the construction business, so he suggested using explosives to destroy the farmhouse completely and end the problem forever. John's decision was swift and decisive, but Claire insisted that the truth had to be uncovered before they destroyed the farmhouse. Since it was not their property, John had no choice but to agree. The next day, John obtained explosives from his friend and drove to the farmhouse to meet Claire. On the way, Lonnie warned him kindly. He had to find a way to keep this woman from joining in, because if she insisted on coming along, she might not only fail to help, but also put them all in danger. John was just about to reply when...
What? What's up? Huh? Nothing. I just thought I saw something, that's all.
A sudden fright left him deeply unsettled, so before the operation, he armed himself with every weapon he could find, and only after making sure he was fully prepared did he, Lonnie, and Claire enter the farmhouse to search. But strangely, there was nothing suspicious inside. Just as they were about to leave, John noticed drag marks on the floor, and behind a cabinet, something was clearly hidden. When he pushed the clutter aside, a hidden door was revealed. John and Lonnie pushed it open, and a familiar stench rushed out. It was definitely where Charles had been conducting his experiments.
It's dark as cinder.
Gentlemen,
Boss.
John took the lead and crawled into the passage. The basement did not look deep, but the space inside was much larger than expected. On both sides of the hallway there were many rooms, but all the doors were tightly locked. Just as John was about to break one open, Claire found a room with the door left ajar. Inside were piles of books, and on the table lay Kerwin's experiment notes. It had to be what Charles had found in the farmhouse. John only needed to open the first page to be instantly shocked by its contents. Kerwin claimed he would return because he had transcended the end of time. The further John read, the more his heart sank. It recorded the method for carrying out a forbidden ritual.
When suddenly the skeleton is reconstituted, the operator is pulled asunder as the flesh he useth to restore himself returneth to its rightful owner.
What's he talking about?
He's talking about bringing people back from the dead.
John, that's insane.
The contents sounded impossible, but when they stepped into the next room, they realized it might actually be real. On the table were all kinds of experimental potions, and on the wall stood many urns. This was the place where Charles had been conducting his immortality experiments based on the notes. To test if it was real, John poured ashes onto a piece of raw meat, then sprinkled the potion over it. Within seconds, the lump of meat began to writhe, and then it transformed into a deformed hand. It seemed Charles's experiment had succeeded. John pocketed the remaining potion, then headed deeper into the basement. At the end of the corridor was a massive cellar, clearly much older, and the ground was covered with many shafts. Lonnie curiously looked into one of them, only to be terrified by what he saw. Inside were several grotesque, deformed creatures, which were surely the failed results of the experiments. But Charles was not practicing dark sorcery. Instead, it was a kind of alchemy known as necromantic alchemy. In alchemy, the tiny particles left after cremation are called essential salts, which can awaken both the body and soul of the dead. But it is crucial to note that in order for resurrection to succeed, the essential salts must come from a complete body. Otherwise, what comes back will be a malformed creature. And the twisted figures in these shafts were clearly the failed results of Kerwin's experiments. Kerwin was born in the early 17th century, and in the 18th century he moved to Providence to further his pursuit of immortality. And Charles lived in the early 20th century. So by rough calculation, Kerwin had already lived over 100 years when he died, which meant these deformed creatures had been here for at least a century. The horror of the scene left them utterly shaken. They turned to leave. But the monsters, tormented by hunger for over 100 years, would not easily let go of the flesh and blood delivered to their doorstep. Lonnie was startled and dropped the oil lamp that was lighting their way onto the ground. In the darkness, John told him to move toward the sound. Lonnie lit a lighter, and they carefully groped forward in the dark.
Watch your step.
John pulled with all his strength to lift Lonnie out, but the creature in the shaft had seized his leg. Under their constant pulling, Lonnie's body was gradually torn apart and finally completely devoured by the monsters. Lonnie's death filled John with rage. He picked up the terrified Claire and managed to escape the cellar. He set up the explosives along the way out, and once they reached a safe distance, John pressed the remote switch and blew the farmhouse of forbidden secrets into a pile of ruins. John quickly took Claire to the hospital, but there he received troubling news. She had suffered a mild concussion and might lose part of her memory, though perhaps that was a blessing. But the doctor also told John something unexpected. Claire was pregnant. Back at the office, John sat in the empty room feeling despondent, even thinking of giving up the case. But when he opened the suitcase brought from the farmhouse and saw the disguises inside, he suddenly understood the truth. To bring justice for Lonnie, John drove through the night to the asylum and confronted Charles. He got straight to the point, revealing Charles's true identity.
I blew it up. Afraid so. I blew the shit out of it. And if you ever want to go home again, you're going to have to do it with a shovel. Now this is Charles.
Hearing John's words, Charles stopped pretending and admitted that he was Kerwin. Over 100 years ago, Kerwin had been gravely injured when villagers attacked him, and knowing he would not last long, he made a careful plan. First, he had his ashes preserved, ensuring they could later be used for resurrection through alchemy. A century later, Charles inherited the farmhouse exactly as planned, and discovered the secret of immortality. Then, out of curiosity, he revived Kerwin. To avoid being discovered, Kerwin disguised himself as Dr. Ash. When Charles was away, Kerwin took his place. Eventually, they quarreled violently.
Charles and I soon disagreed on the disposition of flesh. Charles simply couldn't reconcile himself to the resurrective hunger.
Give me the satisfaction of some answers. What are you doing?
Kerwin not only killed Charles, but also took his flesh. But immortality was only the beginning. Kerwin's research granted him unimaginable power, and once the ritual was complete, he could even control the universe and command life and death. After revealing everything, Kerwin easily broke free from the straitjacket. Though he still looked human, he now possessed inhuman power, and John was helpless under his assault. Hearing the commotion, an orderly rushed in and pinned Kerwin to the wall, but in the next instant, Kerwin snapped his neck with ease. Kerwin then turned toward John, preparing to take all of his flesh. It seemed hopeless, but just then, John pulled out the half bottle of potion from his pocket, and before Kerwin's stunned eyes, he poured it onto Charles's remains. The next moment, Charles was resurrected, and the two began a savage struggle. The protective net on the window was destroyed in the fight. The two continued battling on the floor, and as Kerwin's body was torn open, streams of red energy poured out, which Charles absorbed, causing new flesh to sprout wildly. But in the next moment, both their bodies erupted in blinding light. When John opened his eyes, only a pile of bluish-black ashes remained. Their disappearance was tied to a taboo of necromantic alchemy. The one whose flesh was taken, and the one who took it, could not come into contact, otherwise the ritual would collapse, and their bodies would cancel each other out like matter and antimatter, ultimately disappearing completely. After witnessing this incredible scene firsthand, John achieved final victory, but it was not truly over. To prevent panic, he threw the suitcase out of the window to make it look like Charles had escaped. Then he covered his wound with his coat and left the asylum quietly, as if nothing had happened. The ending is just like the beginning of the story. John recorded the entire process, and it became a secret known to no one else. The Resurrected was adapted from the famous Cthulhu story, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. In the original, the final confrontation between John and Kerwin played out differently. Kerwin tried to resurrect his allies to fight John, while John recited an incantation he had just learned from the books in the farmhouse. When John spoke the name Yog-Sothoth, Kerwin, who had been casting his spell, suddenly froze, unable to utter a single word, waving his arms madly until his body dissolved completely. This explained the source of Kerwin's power, the outer god from the Cthulhu mythos known as Yog-Sothoth. It was described as a vast collection of glowing spheres, seen as the ruler of time and space and the unity of all things. Its true form exists outside all universes and dimensions, possessing infinite knowledge, and it is said to be all-knowing. All great wizards, artists, and thinkers are its projections in different dimensions. Unlike other outer gods, Yog-Sothoth was said to give a much greater reward. Those who crossed the ultimate gate and beheld it could gain knowledge of all things, and this explained why Kerwin collected the bodies of sorcerers. He not only used them in his resurrection rituals, but also sought from them the method of passing through the ultimate gate. Judging from the outcome, Kerwin may indeed have succeeded, but John proved far greater, not only uncovering the entire truth, but also solving the crisis with only one teammate lost, sparing society from chaos. Most importantly, John did not lose his mind. That concludes today's film. See you in the next video.